Hi, it's Chris.
Ah, Chris Weisdorf. How are you
Hey,
doing?
good, good, good.
Fantastic. Pardon?
Good. I just finished a call, so I'm using
Yeah.
the app on my new phone, and I just downloaded it, and I gotta get it working properly. But I can see you and hear you. I don't know about my camera, but I'll figure it out. I'll figure this out. But I can see you and hear you, and everything's all good.
Perfect. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we are glad that you are here, and I have my friend Chantel Matheson beside me, which is befitting because last year, before we were aware of more options, we were hosting lawfully organized summits so that we could get down to the truth. And I invited Katya and Peter Palmieri to also join in because Katya and I do the Monday night Kingdom Within podcast together, where we go deeper into the context that we define ourselves by using Katya's words. So that is an opportunity. This is an opportunity to connect with them. My friend Neil Sperling as well has shown up today. And so he's doing a tremendous amount around stopping and ending the human trafficking. And ultimately, while it's very different, we're all being trafficked until we actually take a stand. And so I wanted to bring together this amazing group of people. Tammy, it's awesome to have you here too as well. How are you?
I'm good.
It's awesome.
Good as can be, I guess.
Yeah, it's been many months. And I remember when you came into many of the calls that we've hosted previously, and it's great to see you again today. So thank you for showing up.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Inviting me.
Absolutely. Jason Walker was going to come as well, so hopefully he will be here soon. But ultimately, I always go by the adage that whoever is meant to be in the room will be there at exactly the time that they are meant to be there. And so we're going to just jump straight in. I am contemplating, should we stream it to Facebook? Or just keep it off and then post it afterwards?
You don't think that'll get censored?
Right, I know.
This is pretty risky stuff for mainstream media.
What do you mean?
No, they love it.
Right? You mean the mainstream that we've all been drinking from and being poisoned by without knowing the commonality between all of what is going on? Oh my, of course. You know what? It may or may not, but we can stay away from all of that, which is part of a con video game that would have us put our energy into that which is outside of ourselves, which is outside of this present moment. Because look at Quantum Syntax Grammar, a book that I have mentioned previously. In there, it talks about the only moment that is ever happening is now, which we're aware we've all never been in a not now moment, but the entire legal fiction is based in a not now moment. And so is mental health. From my perspective, if we think about when we're trapped up here, it's because we're not in here. We are out of our heart and we are in our heads, which is a confined space that either loops, because I've had the analogy or the example shared that makes so much sense, that if we're scared to go upward in our awareness and we don't want to go downward, instead of being on the spiral, we just go round and round. So I thought that was a really great place for us to kind of just touch in with tonight's or today's topic, which I'd like to talk about Munchausen Syndrome and Stockholm Syndrome, which are both symptoms of mental health. And if my friend Dwigu Nangar were here, which Katya and I co-hosted the podcast on Monday with, she was the one that brought it into my awareness that there is a direct connection between the DSM-5, 4, 3, 2, 1, all of the DSMs that have basically made it so that mental illnesses, mental disorders are defined in a guide that makes it so that we are able to take on a status that drops our standing. And so this is all very much connected to the mental health, and the remembrance of who we truly are and came here to be. So I would love to throw it over to the Palmarys first and hear from your perspective. We're going to get into the syndromes. Has anyone heard about Munchausen Syndrome or Stockholm Syndrome?
I've heard of Stockholm, but what's Munchausen?
Munchausen by proxy syndrome. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, if you want to speak into that, Chris.
Yeah, everything that we've been undergoing for the last 2 years is a mass, like you've heard mass formation psychosis that Dr. Malone has talked about. And we've heard about the COVID cult, this completely, it resembles, it is a cult. It's not a religion, it's a cult. And in terms of, Munchausen by proxy, what that means is generally it's never happened with humanity like this before ever, but it's happened with individuals. It doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen, where you have, usually it's a caregiver, it's someone who is a mother, or it could be a hired caregiver or something, but they have some sort of like a relationship. It could be a very unhealthy parasitic relationship with someone else, and that someone else who's under their care, they say that they have some kind of disease, and in fact they don't have a disease, they're not sick, but essentially the caregiver convinces them that they're sick, and as a result has to take all these types of measures, and in some cases that the caregiver will profit in some way from the disease, from the treatment of this disease. And there's a great, I have no idea if anyone's seen it. There's a great series, only I think it was 8 episodes, from 2019, like right before COVID, 2019. It came out at the end of 2019, called The Act. And it's all a true story. And it's about this girl, and she has like a feeding tube in her stomach and all this stuff. And her mother is played by Patricia Arquette, and has convinced her for her whole life that she's sick, and she's in a wheelchair and all this stuff, but there's nothing wrong with her. And it's a fantastic and really dark and disturbing story. And it's something that stylistically, I think, is one of the best things I've ever seen. So I highly recommend it. That's all I'm going to say on it. But that's what Munchausen by proxy syndrome is.
Thank you for being thorough as always. And I did bring up the description on the screen, so you identified what it is better, and it came into my awareness because of that movie, The Act.
Oh, nice.
That was when I became aware of this and my own experience in the mental health system, and the realization, real eyes to see the situation. It was like, whoa, you mean like disorder means something's out of order. So if the room is disordered and then you're just going to throw poison on top of the disorder in order to change the order of things that were never dealt with, what? Palmarys, I'm throwing it over to you. I apologize, but I think that was the good segue there. I'm going to stop screen sharing this one.
Go ahead. Oh, just interesting. I mean, I don't know. I'm interested to learn more about some of these syndromes that people are dealing with. The one that we just discussed now seems to me it comes up as a something we've discovered, that we tend, the ego or our lower self tends to make up stories and make itself a victim and make itself sick from actually taking responsibility for its greatness, or for what we say is integrity. Really what this all is a call towards integrity. And that takes a lot of responsibility to be someone of integrity, or to be someone of cause, or to be someone responsible for your own life, self-sovereign. And when you do that, you also you create the space to take on the responsibility to be that for others, to provide a space for others to then become powerful within themselves, not to poke them or prod them, but to find that space within yourself, the responsibility, that place of self-sovereignty, I think. And that takes a lot. And I think we've made up what's happened is we've been, the church maybe, our parents, somewhere along the line, people will discover for themselves. I kind of have some ideas of where that seed of belief started. And it's something, if we're talking about mind control, I mean, I'm very much looking for specific words that have meaning, that are at the seed of our consciousness, that really start this context about who we are. And what I've discovered is it comes down to a question. I think Katty might have mentioned it once or the last time you guys spoke, where it becomes a question of, are you the one? Are you the one? Or are you not the one? And it's a deep, fundamental question. And that question is invokes both fear and awe at the same time. That awe of like the responsibility, the possibility that you could be the source, having an experience as you, and what that requires as a responsibility, or not. And you choose in life what that looks like. And that context, a lot of things in our life starts to fill in the space for us about what we say we are and who we're told we are. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about mind control, we are being born as loving, joyful, already beings, as babies. We're relying on our parents. We're relying on previous generations to plant the seed. So the seed is already not corrupted when we're born. And then that seed starts to get corrupted based on the stories that our parents were told and are believing. And obviously the school and the church and the society. And we call these boxes of language based on various things, like how I look at myself as a person, or how I look at us as a couple, or marriage is a box. All of those are separate boxes of language, which I create based on my context, my experiences of life, and what people are telling me and what I'm learning. So mind control is not a general thing. It's really driven by people's experience and what they're dealing with. And yes, there are stories that we're being told as a collective, as a human race, about who we are. And that definitely has an impact on our ways of being and acting for ourselves internally. And all that manifests as ways of being and acting out in the world, which that as a collective has manifested into I don't know whether you see what we have out there as either a crisis or normal. We just had a COVID situation and now we're going to get back to normal.
It's what we get used to. And Stockholm Syndrome is actually when the victim develops feelings and empathy and care for their abuser. So Stockholm Syndrome is where the victim is actually protecting the abuser, which is what we have right now, because the context is that the mind controllers, aka the corporation known as our governments, are ultimately our friends, and they have our best interest at heart. And it was peer reviewed, therefore it must be good. But who paid the peer review people? Who's paying the fact checkers? And who benefits? Right? Like all of what's going on is ultimately because we've stopped trusting ourselves, because we had a context of not enough, which Katya and I have talked about in the Kingdom Within podcast. The context of not enough means that we are not worthy of our birthright. Who am I to be brilliant, talented, gorgeous, and fabulous? Marianne Williamson asks in Our Deepest Fear. Well, who are you not to be? If not you, then who? All these books and, they tell us that the savior is coming. well, I'm sorry, like we're the ones that are here. We're the players on the field. We're it. Like there might be more that come through us if we can actually maintain our fertility in order to bring about change, which is what we do in meetings like this. So props to each of us for getting ourselves here, for making the effort and being able and willing to consciously share the screen, to share the scene, because this is an act. And right now there's a Reopening Ontario Act 2020 that needs to end here in Ontario. Everyone else is not necessarily where we are, and yet we're all here. Like nowhere is now here. It is time for us to let go of that story of not enough, because it's not here either. And I'm gonna give you an opportunity, Katya, if you want to speak in from this point in terms of how destructive it is and how much easier it is to condition someone to believe that they are less than, to believe that they are sick, to believe that they are disordered or have an illness that is going to make them disabled. Well, there's more ability in disability than there is dis. And that's only just making us believe that we are less because it was programmed into us so that we would be easier to control because we didn't trust ourselves enough to speak out. And you've done that.
Can't hear you.
You can't hear us.
Now I can. Did you hear? We lost you.
We missed a little bit.
Well, sometimes we only hear what we need. So based on where you've been, what you've heard, would love to hear about your perspective in the story of Not Enough and how that ties into the MK Ultra experience or mind control programming and propaganda.
Sure. Did you want to say anything else?
Did you know what you wanted to say? No, I just want to come full circle with that thought about the various programming, and I really do. I hear what you say around they want to control us, and there is a different way of looking at it, like they are us. Like if you're looking at the one and we're all one, and it's, you know, the question you have to ask is, you're right, there's something's controlling us, but I'm looking deeper. It's an awe to take on the responsibility, and I wonder if at some point in our history we asked for someone to take control for us because of the responsibility that it takes to be a self-sovereign, powerful individual, and taking that on for others. So I don't necessarily think it's someone is doing that to us in order to control us, as it is as much as subconsciously and or in the past we sort of asked people a lot. And when I say we or I'm talking about humanity in a way, has asked for this kind of comfort zone and for someone to take over for us. So I'm taking responsibility for the fact that our situation in the world right now is a lower self way of being and acting that I've done. I've seen it in myself, where it's like you give up control, or you don't look and you don't ask the questions, and someone else is going to fill in that gap for you. And I think what's happened is a lot of us are in a place of apathy, and therefore we allow the mind control to someone else is going to fill in the gap, that we're not individuals and or as a collective, as a society, are not doing the work to ask the questions to fill in the gap, so someone else is going to fill it in for us. That I just wanted to say that it's coming at us from both angles. It's almost like we're being taken advantage of, mind controlled for a purpose, and we are also doing it ourselves because we are a manifestation of what we're thinking of as individuals and as a collective.
Yeah, well, it's not a them. And when you ask who is they, that is a very important question, because in common law, where we walk on common ground, we need to actually be able to look our accuser, or the one, which an accuser is a status and a defendant is a status. And we need to look at these statuses and say that you don't see a status, you see a man or a woman that has taken on a status. And so we need to be looking our accusers eye to eye to be also able to write it on the page and say, who is they, or who is we, or who is you? Because those are all plurals. And if we don't understand that, then those will be used against us, because the maxim of law says that he who is deceived, let him be, essentially, without that being the exact phraseology. But in terms of the not enough story and bringing it into the ease to manipulate one who believes themselves to be less. Katia, if you speak into that.
Sure. I can speak from my own experience. So I've dealt with the not good enough literally as soon as I as far back as I can think. I can go back probably when I was even 5 or 6. And I contribute it to actually my involvement in Catholicism and in religion. And I came from a very strict background and parents who held in place all of the various things that you take on as you take on church. And I just recall in the languaging that I heard, the way my parents spoke, the way that the church spoke, it was very much in a demeaning sort of way. And again, it also visibly shows up like a patriarchal, leadership versus the women. And I never saw the women. And so I grew up with a lot of family that were tied to Catholicism. And I look at women more so for role model. And I experienced firsthand a lot of them in a diminished state, like they wouldn't be speaking up, and they took on this role, and it was very much in a box. And this is how you're to be a mother. This is how you're to be a daughter. And so I became very much dictated by these boxes of language that were so limiting in who I could be. And now, having done this work, I look back and I think, oh my God, because I've got 3 daughters myself. And I think, what I've done up till now. And in some ways, I've taken on the same kind of path that my mom did. And thankfully, that has, my awareness has become so much more, aware of those boxes. And I now, speak to them from possibility, from potential. And it's such a transformation, because if I look back at where I was actually operating from, much of the time I was giving up control to everyone, because I just had this way of feeling diminished, that my words didn't matter. I didn't have a say. And, I felt like, I was actually bullied in school for that probably that reason, is that I came like this victim and this smallness and diminished little girl who could be, stomped on. And so I very much see that the boxes that we're born into that basically say, what does a marriage look like? What does raising children look like? That from where I was growing up, it was very, very in the box. And that's the way I saw it. I didn't see anything else outside of that until I started to do the work on the inside. And once I started to go on the inside, a whole other world opened up for me. And that's when I began to see, oh my God, there's other ways of doing things. And now I'm being my voice. And I've just learned so much about how language can be so limiting and so controlling, especially if you're not aware. And then the opportunity that we all have to learn a new language, to look, outside of that box, and then be in wonder of all the possibilities that exist.
Yeah, because ultimately mind control can work for you or against you. So we can either choose to positively program ourselves and those in our midst, or we can choose to be a life sucker, an energy vampire, or one that suppresses others and pushes them down. Because right now we're dealing with LSD, Lucifer, Satan, devil, like the characters in a different way than other mind expansion tools that can be used. But that is it was interesting. It was brought into the context of the call before we actually came on to talk about it in a deeper way. And so I just really bring that up because we have to look at this from an unloving and loving light perspective. Like, we feel it when it is unloving light, when it is not authentic. And then we also feel it when it is. And so if we actually get back in our hearts, then we are in the field of the super consciousness that connects us to all beings everywhere. The subconscious contain all of the programming and are what allow the body to work without our having to think about taking that breath or blinking the eyes when it's time or moving. And we don't have to think about what we're doing. Subconsciously, it just is on autopilot. And we can also be running our lives on that same autopilot, if not engaging our conscious mind, which develops at around the age of 7. And that's when we can then accept, neglect, or reject ideas. But prior to that, we have everything going directly into our subconscious, which is like a filing cabinet that contains all of our BS. And that BS is our belief systems that we define to be the context of how we see ourselves, the world, and other people. Because if I were to ask you, and this is oftentimes used in coaching exercises, if I was to ask you to take some time to actually write down how you see yourself, how you see the world, and how you see other people, that's going to give you a lot of insight into your inner world. Because how you see all of those aspects, just those 3 tell so much, will determine how safe you feel. Because if you don't feel safe, like we've got Robin Benedict down there with Baby Freedom in the bottom corner, just joined us, which is wonderful. So I think Baby Freedom made her appearance, which is wonderful. Hey, it's great to have you here, Robin and Freedom. Beautiful. See, we've got Freedom in the screen, literally, who's just enjoying some milk and being loved, because that's what life is about. And the mind control tells us we need to be something other than we are in order to be enough. But what if we already were? What if we actually recognize that it can work for us or against us, and we chose to be the parent that puts the child within ourselves into a better place of inner security, instead of being insecure outside of ourselves because we never created that sense of home that we could come into within our own selves. And Stockholm Syndrome, as I mentioned previously, I just wanted to share the definition. It's a condition in which hostages develop a psychological bond with their captors during captivity, which is rare to actually get any field research on, they say, because it's very difficult to see that happen while it's being recorded, because that kind of connection can only really happen at the heart level, where we recognize and see ourselves in the other. And Neil, I'm gonna, if you're able, I'll throw it over to you, because with the sacred societies that have sacred information and then turned secret, there was a question that you had actually introduced me to about how to actually gain entry into those communities, which is very relevant to what's going on now, if you wanted to speak into that.
Sure, be glad to. There's a lot that I have to add to this at this moment. The ancient mystical studies from the ancients going back into Egypt and to India are the 2 most important ones that are relevant with the way our society has grown from. And it's gone into the Greek philosophies, where they actually study deep metaphysics, because metaphysics has been forgotten. And that has been one of the major problems with us losing our control of our own will. And we look at all these different syndromes and things of that nature, and we call them by a name. And what that does is it brings clarity to the situation, but it doesn't bring us to the root of the problem. See, when we're born, we come through a veil of forgetfulness. And so when we come down, we're walking on the land, and the veil of forgetfulness is we actually forget the massive what we really are. We think that we're in this massive body, but we're not. We're definitely not. This is a very limiting playground, if you wish. That's really what this whole world is. We are living the dream that we create. And we've forgotten the power that we have that's above that veil of forgetfulness that we drop down into. So I see such a big difference between clarity and lucid. And it stems from my, both from my metaphysical background training as well as from Toltec. And I love them both, and they certainly overlap in a huge way. All of your ancient Aboriginal cultures on the planet, they have the same stories, and they've never communicated with each other. And so how could they have the same stories? The ones in Peru versus the ones in Europe and the ones in Australia, and yet their basic philosophies and what they know is all the same. And that ties right back into what the metaphysical and the ancient Indian philosophies all had to teach. So on the clarity level, we talk about all these different syndromes and everything, and we start to understand the complexity of it. But that's the problem, is we get stuck in the complexities, and it's really not anything complex whatsoever. It's nothing to do with complexities. It's just remembering who the fuck you are, who you were born to be, who you really are prior to coming into this physical existence, before you drop down into this world. And so with all of the programming that we've been conditioned by from our life, Steve, the fall from grace, the Adam and Eve story was all about losing our conscious connection to our greater self. And our greater self is connected to the whole, which is God, whatever you want to call him, source. And so when you start to see things lucid, all this clarity nonsense is just unnecessary stuff to even talk about and consider. You want to get right to the source of who you are. And when you start to touch into the source of who you are, you realize thoughts are things. They've proven that with an EEG machine. They hook you up to an EEG machine and our thoughts are monitored. But what the metaphysics and the ancients knew is that our thoughts are electrical impulses that radiate out into the whole ether. And they're like ripples in the ether, like ripples in a pond, and they really go out to the ends of the universe. So that's how powerful our thoughts are. And if we start to realize that the ultimate thing is to control our thoughts and remember who you are. And now there's a big, it's a re-dash member. It's a re-dash member. You're reconnecting with who you really are. And when you start to do that, it's an unending journey because let's face it, there's not too many people that we've ever known of that can turn water into wine or walk on the water. And yet there are mystics and powerful spiritual people on the planet, and there has been all through mankind's history. There's been some that never eat. They don't need to eat. They bring in their sustenance from the sun, and that goes against our conscious mind. But it doesn't go against the fact that we are a whole lot more than what this physical body is. And there's also people that can manifest things in thin air. Who was the fellow there? Give me a second and I'll think of him. Anyways, there's an ancient, a recent guru in India that was known for manifesting things in thin air, and he would give people whatever they came to when they came to see him. And all of that's possible for everybody. And that's the weirdest thing, is because life of Jesus, people keep thinking that there's going to be a savior come, but he was real. He had an absolute life. There's absolutely no question in my mind that his life was real. But he was not here to save us. He was here to show us the way. These works that I do, others will come to do more. John 14, 10 through 12, my favorite Bible passage, tells it all. Because there's others going to come to do more. And as soon as somebody steps into that mode and starts to show their ability to create and manifest in thin air or heal others, everybody has been programmed to think that's the work of the devil. So it goes back into the fact that we've crossed through that veil of forgetfulness. We're down here on planet Earth right now, in the moment, but we've forgotten who we really are. We think that we're this material mass of flesh, and that's not who we are. There's a spark of the divine in everybody, even the jerks. So that's what I want to add at this moment. I'll continue to listen and see what other people have to say.
I absolutely love that. And the question that the ones entering into now then secret societies before sacred societies, what was the question that was asked and the answer?
Yeah, and there's even evidence that the missing years of Jesus, he actually went to Egypt and studied under the Essenes, and he went to India as well and studied under the philosophers and whatnot there. So like there's evidence that those missing years are not missing at all. They're just missing from what they want us to know. And so when they started teaching people, the adepts, the neophytes, they were learning. They get to a certain level, and before they got to know any more of the secret powers that are available to everybody to create, to manifest, to heal, it's obvious that those kinds of powers could be used corruptly. And that is what has happened on the planet today. It's been infiltrated. But when a person got to a certain level in the past, they had to answer a certain question with the right answer in order to get further training. And the question was, how do you know when you are suffering? So I ask you that. I want you to just ponder what you would answer that right now. If I asked you personally and we were just sitting one-on-one, how do you know when you are suffering? The answer that led the adept into higher training was, when I see another human being suffer. When I see another suffer, then I too am suffering. You see, Moses came to us with 10 commandments. Jesus, he wiped them all out. He came with 2. 1, love one another and bear each other's burdens. That was it. It's not any more complicated than that. And when we get stuck into the analysis mode where we're studying all these different things, which brings us clarity of thought, it's not bringing us closer to the reality of who we really are. And that is the solution, is to get past all of the questions and just accepting, remembering, reconnecting with who you really are. So how do you know when you are suffering?
I love that. Thank you for introducing that question to me years ago. And as you were speaking, Neil, the one thing that I wanted to say is that when the man known as Jesus was alive, he was not known as Jesus at that time, from what we can read of, because obviously none of us were there specifically. But, well, maybe we were, but not as this version of us. And the point is that Jesus was the status applied to the man that came with the 2 testaments or the 2 commandments, that then the man's words were then taken into something bigger. So the indoctrination, the religioning of BS.
You got to remember the most important fact is it was like over 300 years after Jesus's life that they put the Bibles together. And there's hundreds of missing books. The book of Thomas and the book of Enoch are 2 that were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and some of them won't ever be found. I'd like to have access to and understanding all the way of writing in the secluded monasteries in Tibet and places like that. That would be really fascinating to be able to go through their archives and actually understand what's written, because it's deep stuff. Metaphysics is deep stuff. It's a way past the clarity, and it's back into you want to get lucid. When you're lucid, you're always working in the root of what is the cause, and it always stems to the person in the mirror.
To the man in the mirror or the woman in the mirror. No persons here, personalities. Oh,
Well,
sure.
yeah. Okay, we'll let you have that one.
That's fair. But while you were speaking, I wanted the story that seems really relevant is the story of a man that he's walking, he's really tired, he's lost, he's in the middle of nowhere, and in the middle of this field, he sees this tree. And so he goes and he lies underneath of this tree, and he's enjoying himself, and he wakes up and he realizes he's hungry. And suddenly all the food that he could ever desire is there in front of him, all the best options that he could possibly have, and he's just so grateful. He eats till he's full, and then he thinks, well, I wish I had some nice beverage to wash this down, and suddenly all that he could desire was there. And so then he's drunken into a stupor, and he's just blissed out and loving it. And then he starts feeling a little vulnerable. Like, I'm out in the middle of nowhere, and like, what if these robbers were to come and steal from me? And what would happen then? And suddenly these robbers come and they steal from him. And then he gets really scared, and he thinks, like, what if they torture me? And suddenly they do. And then what if I die and I go to hell? And then he does. And it happened, he was underneath of a wishing tree. So the reality is that we all are. Our reality is realistic evidence appearing legit, and tomorrow's yesterday is an acronym I came up with that makes a lot of sense, because tomorrow's yesterday is what now is, where the only time is ever happening. And when we're in anxiety, we're in a future moment that hasn't happened yet, where we have no power. And when we're in regret or denial, we're in a not now moment that isn't here, that we have no power over either. And so we panic because we have no ability to change it, and it's just the loop instead of going up or down. So when we get caught in our head, then we are, instead of putting our energy into something we have control over, trying to focus our energies onto something that's already happened, which brings us to the place of cognitive dissonance. Is anyone wanting to contribute your definition of cognitive dissonance? I know Moz might have an insightful contribution to share. If I see you unmute, then I'll know that it is true, though. Anyone else is also open to be able to share. Cognitive dissonance. Ooh, Bella.
Well, I don't have a definition of it, but I'm recently coming out of it. I went through a string of girlfriends who were narcissists, and I've recently learned a lot about narcissism and the amount of cognitive dissonance that it can incur in the reciprocal partner. And I'm still coming out of it. It's been 2 months of no contact. And yeah, it's really something. It's really something how far how it can slip in unnoticed as over time. I guess that might be maybe the very definition or the results of the definition of it. Like, you don't notice it as it's happening, and maybe you don't even notice it until something breaks you out of it, and all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, my brain just is not working. So I don't have a definition of it, but I have a hard experience of it.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And it strikes me that what you're describing is more the shutdown experience that we go into emotionally when we've been betrayed by someone that we gave our heart to, that did what they needed to do in order to leave the scene. with as much of your energy as possible, because people will hook or cord themselves into our energy fields if we are open to it, because evil has to be invited in. So evil cannot just come in. That's why all the vampire movies show that you have to welcome the devil in, or you have to welcome the vampires in. So when we experience that, then we have to understand that I don't know how to get it out. I'm not the skilled one to say, like, once we've opened the door. Like, I'm just thinking about everyone that opened the door to the devil without knowing it, because they were deceived, and how we can actually support all of those. Because cognitive dissonance is where you have two competing ideas coexisting in the same space. So you got the baby idea about, maybe I'm in an abusive relationship. And then you've got the way bigger idea of the fact that you've got someone that's been feeding off of you for however long that was. And they're going to project and gaslight and all the things that commonly now we talk about narcissism, but we have a narcissistic culture, which is the cult you are, and the culturally accepted BS that we've agreed with. So in that moment of the dawning idea, maybe I'm being abused in your relationship specifically, or the larger collective generally, that baby is now coming into a territory that's very hostile with adult, grown, very menacing ideas that want this baby to die, because for it to come here is going to take up their space. Because you either care for the baby, which is going to take a lot of your effort, like Robin knows and shows with Freedom, or we're going to continue doing what we've always done and get more of what we've always got, which we have to understand too, when within this growth experience that we're all going through, our loved ones don't want us to change, because if we change, it inconveniences them, because then they have to work to catch up when they didn't choose to grow. Like, you were weak when I found you. Who are you to get stronger and to step into your power because I triggered you and I didn't mean to? I just wanted what you have in abundance, to the point where you thought that maybe someone else could wield your power more responsibly than what you could. Or at least that was what I experienced when I went through what I did with the mental health situation. Mental health system situation, I should say, because it wasn't so much, it was said to be psychosis, which we have a mass psychosis, which is two competing ideas or two competing realities. I came into the awareness that, like, the food is poisoned, our land is poisoned. I came into the awareness the system's corrupt and the police are in on it. Like, that's not a comfortable reality. And, you know, I wouldn't recommend calling them to tell them, because when I did, I got Form 1 under a Mental Health Act, which then I got Form 3, which was 2 weeks involuntary hold, whereas the first was supposed to be 3 days voluntary hold. But I didn't know before I went through what I did that there was an indefinite leave option, and that like electroshock therapy is a common treatment, that people are being wiped. And it was just recently that I heard that it makes complete sense that if you actually move a magnet over top of a tape, it wipes it. Well, what is everyone being filled with now? And so how are we going to deal with a collective wiping of data of who we see ourselves to be? And then we're at the mercy of a system designed to save itself, yourself, significant time, energy, money. The system can work for us if we do the right thing. Because this is the thing, when Peter was saying about they, like, who is they? Well, we are they. We are it. We're all of it. Maybe not the elitists or the eugenicists up at the top that are trying to reduce the population and do the culling of the collective in order to make us slaves easier to control, and to then only have the children left who have already been indoctrinated into a sick world that's willless, because this is a direct attack on our will. And then we have to see that, like, awareness comes in, and then will is what actually grounds the lightning strike. that can then magnify into the world as desire that is then embodied with manifestation. Well, I'm a will of manifestation, and the men in this green are the manifestations embodied, right? So this is a head trip, maybe a heart trip. If it's not a heart trip, we're not in the feeling space, which is the subconscious territory. And then the super conscious is the heart, which is feeling. So right now we're living in a world where mental health has been used to keep us in our heads out of our heart. And then if you doubt it, like the term conspiracy theory was created by an alphabet agency that wanted to make sure that nobody questioned the mainstream narrative and how poisoned it is. Because a toxic load is simply where poison is added over time gradually until eventually the toxic load gets too great for the lake or body of water of which we are largely, is too full of poison to support life. Well, we need to make sure we don't get to that place. And furthermore, we also need to know how to support one another through the awakening process, because it is not comfortable to experience bringing home a baby that we got on a Zoom meeting and we've talked about with a friend or few maybe, but everybody else thinks we're crazy, which means we have less friends, we have fewer family members, if any, left, right? And then what's going to happen when things in the fall get bad, because it's already planned? We've got to be able to support those who are waking up to the deception, which is why we've started these meetings. And I appreciate each of you for showing up to this first one, and definitely I want to open the floor. And if anyone has something more you'd like to contribute to this first summit, I've scheduled it for an hour and a half. So it's not to the end, but I like to make it so that we're not staying for the sake of staying the whole time, but at the same time, we make sure that we're just mindful of where we're at in terms of time, because I do honor your time. It's your life, literally. Time, energy, effort, attention, money. Those are our team players, our energetic resources. We've only got the 86,400 seconds we woke up with today. So I respect you for investing it here today. Thank you. Neil?
You're very welcome. Very welcome. The biggest thing about this great awakening, it's all about bringing that part of us that's above that veil of forgetfulness and embodying it right here in the here and now in ourselves, so that we don't believe ever again that we are separate from the whole of who we really are. And that's awakening the warrior spirit inside of each every one of us and inside of ourselves, and to recognize it and see it in other people, no matter where they are on the level of awakening. So there's two Toltec quotes that I want to read you. This one here's: to be the warrior you are. For the average man, the world is weird, because if he's not bored with it, he's at odds with it. For a warrior, the world is weird, because it is so stupendous, awesome, mysterious, unfathomable. The warrior must assume responsibility for being here in this marvelous world, in this marvelous time. And that is what we're all working hard to reach out to actually become and get to that point where we do that. So for the average man, the world is weird, because if he's not bored with it, he's at odd with it. And you see it around you all the time. The warrior, the world is weird because he sees it as it's unfathomable. It's just so amazing. And I wake up every day thinking about that. Each of our bodies have 100 trillion cells in it. That's a lot. That's a lot. And the other quote I want to read is a warrior seeks personal power, not to influence the affairs of people or the world. The world seeks personal power only to get where one is going, and that is to freedom. And to achieve freedom, it is necessary to give it to the affairs of people and the world. So I'm going to read that one again, because it's very connected, and yet it seems to be a dichotomy. A warrior seeks personal power not to influence the affairs of the people or the world. A warrior seeks personal power only to get where one is going, and that is to freedom. And to achieve freedom, it is necessary to give it to the affairs of the people and the world. Those are powerful.
I had pulled up onto the screen the definition of weird that I happened to already have looked up for one of the emails that I wrote yesterday. And weird means suggesting something supernatural or uncanny, a person's destiny, to induce a sense of disbelief or alienation in someone. So when we think something or call something weird, it's actually because it's uncommon. It's uncanny, it's unexpected. And we've come to identify things as weird that don't conform. But the reason that I shared the mental health experience or the mental health system experience is because what did I get imprisoned over or under? A Form 1 and then a Form 3, because I am substance, as are you. And if I am substance and that's a form, my substance had to conform to fit into that form. So when we're dealing with ourselves, our CELLS-F for the cells of fear or faith we fill ourselves with, when we see that we are the substance and that the forms are what we take on and that need us to conform to fit the form, if it is someone else's form that require this form to change into a prisoner that wears a suit, AKA a status, that make us be other than we are, that would have one who says, I have a person, but I am a woman in my private capacity with all common law, which is the unwritten and unlimited law, rights reserved at all times. When I make that distinction, and I also furthermore say that I believe that with my trust, of which we are taught to vest in others, and instead are being called to come to trust ourselves more, I have a person, but that person is not me, and I do not agree to be a surety for it, which means liable for the debts, duties, obligations, roles that are put onto the interface, much like Zoom, as I've shared many times before. Like, I wouldn't be able to reach each of you without this interface. Well, I have an account, which is how I'm able to access this interface and you on yours. Well, those are the equivalent of our persons. Those are not us. We are there. We're here. Hello. It's great to be with you. But we are not this. This is a reflection of the substance that showed up to create form for the performance. And when we actually dare to be weird enough to say, that sounds correct, we might be called crazy. And some of us got there first so that we can say, damn right, I'm crazy, which by definition is different. But I am not insane by any way, shape, or form, because I say I feel my way through life, and it is not dysfunctional to be happy and sad and everything in between, so long as we actually know how to manage ourselves. Because when I got myself out of the hospital that first time when I got locked up for 2.5 weeks, I was personally guaranteed by the psychiatrist that I would fail to self-regulate. And when I did, that I was to go to the nearest ER. And if I got too much sleep, I would go manic, or if I got too much sleep, I would be depressed. And if I got too little sleep, I would go manic, because clearly I am bipolar, because I am emotional, because we live in a universe of polarity, because it's easier to control one that has a history in his story, not our story or her story or my story, but his, right? In his story, it's dysfunctional for her to actually have thoughts about what's going on with his story. Like, his story is very dysfunctional. Her story is pretty dysfunctional as well, because we need our story. Like it can't be one or the other. It's got to be both. It's like why we've got, you know, Katya and Peter wearing black and grayish to balance one another out. Like we've got partners. We got like real men and women holding down the boxes in our corners, and we've got to stand in our own corner and know how to do that. But if we're willing to accept a status or a label of crazy, if we're willing to accept a status or a label of person, or OPCA litigant, organized pseudo-legal commercial argument litigant, like anyone that uses the Freeman of the Land argument, or the Practical Lawful Dissent International group that we got involved with and did the 12 lawfully organized summits to get to the bottom of, and said, nope, we're going to stay away from that, because I think that's how a lot of our warriors are going to get locked up, because they don't know what they're saying and they're submitting forms that are making it so that when those are questioned and they don't know what they wrote, ding, 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 water drips, they get locked up unless they know how to correct their standing, not just a status. Though we're watching a video about private persons, which seems like an oxymoron in some ways. Well, it's not so much an oxymoron, but like a person is in the public and then private. So it is an oxymoron. Yeah, it's an oxymoron. But anyway, that all of this sounds crazy to anyone that's not in the know. But it doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means that we've been intentionally deceived. And each of us have found keys along the way that we've brought to share here today. And so cognitive dissonance was one that I wanted to share. Also, I thought that we could do some prayer, in fact, while we're here for a minute, just literally only a minute. But there are so many that have been harmed. There are so many that have lost their lives. There are so many who are grieving the loss of those who have been damaged, injured, or lost lives, that I think that when we come together for the work of educating ourselves, of coming into uncommon information that then we require time to integrate and embody and let it simmer and settle, which if you're not part of the Peaceful Inner Warriors United Assembly group on Telegram, I'd love for you to join, because we do connect, and I'll post it into the chat before we go, and then in the recording I'll post it there too. But the Peaceful Inner Warriors United Assembly is a place where we can come together and be supported by one another, and also stay in the know as to when these things are happening. And then we can also get some more of the prayer going, and the things that will actually make it so we're not pray with an E, but instead we can pray with an A. Because when we understand the power of coming together, and we do, like
the power of prayer too, as one together.
Yeah, the power of prayer is coming together. So there's a beautiful woman, Narika, in Ireland that could use some prayers, and I said that we would put that into the space. And so I would love if anyone has a name of someone that you would like to have put in, just put the intention. You can either put it into the comments, or we're just dropping into this moment and sending love. So just for one minute, we're just gonna just make some space for some grace to go exactly where it needs to go in this place. And if you want to envision some colors moving around this magical space that we share, let's bring color back into this world without it being colors of the law. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time and making the space. And to also see that as we prayed and sent love and grace and colors where they needed to go in this vast space where we live and call Planet T, I mean Earth. In this space, we just actually made space for us to integrate what we needed to as well. So I'd love for anyone to step forward and put what you would like to have either shared or asked. You can ask a question or comment. I feel like this is a beautiful place at 1:11 in our call. And you had to look at the clock, Tammy, so it maybe didn't feel that long, which is great.
Well, it seems like what's going on now started a long time ago. You mentioned the Catholic Church. I grew up Roman Catholic, and I've learned a big separation between Jesus and the Catholic Church. Not what they're doing now, but from the very beginning, the teachings are completely different. And through my journey in life, I ended up at a Krishna temple, and they told me that's where Jesus went in the missing years. He went to Krishna temples in India, and they have his signatures, Jesus of Nazareth, in their books, because their books go back 5,000-6,000 years without alteration. Whereas in the West, our books get altered every 3 or 4 years. And so like the Christ consciousness and Krishna consciousness are more or less the same thing. But that's not what the church is teaching. I'm not sure if I got my dates right, but I think in the 1500s was when the Bavarian purity law on beer came down. Before then, there was psychedelics in beer and wine. And I've heard stories that the sacrament in the church might have actually been a magic mushroom. And so through these older practices, there was the individual had the ability to have a direct experience to something greater. And then, that's too empowering. You can't have people doing that. So they wiped all that out. Well, now you got to go to church. Now you got to pay the priest, and the priest will connect to God for you. Fast forward several hundred years, and we're in the 1950s, and you have another psychedelic revolution, anti-war, pro-love, and everyone's taking psychedelics. And then MK Ultra starts up. Oh, well, we can't have this. We got to weaponize this. We got to find a way, like the surgeon's scalpel can be used to heal someone or to kill somebody. Well, they took these molecules and tried to weaponize them. Of course, they found out that you couldn't. If you've seen the videos that the British did on the soldiers, it's ridiculous. They give a bunch of soldiers LSD and they just start laughing. And they throw their guns down, they climb a tree, and fuck you, I'm gonna fight in your war. And that's what Timothy Leary said. He said, the kids will not fight your wars, the kids will not join your corporations. Tune in, turn on, drop out, right? Fast forward 2020. Well, psychedelics are coming back again. World War, the war in Eastern Europe, everything is coming up again. And they're the movement, the freedom movement, the love movement's coming up again. And so all of these things definitely seem to be intertwined, and the establishment, the top of the pyramid, is once again working very hard to create the cognitive dissonance, working very hard to create the mass psychosis. And yeah, you wake up and you say, oh, the food's toxic. It's in the tap water. What's in the tap water? Fucking drugs. Oh, you're crazy. No, you put fluoride in the tap water. What's fluoride? Fluoride's Prozac. Prozac is a fluoride molecule. They put fucking Prozac in the tap water because putting LSD in the tap water wasn't going to work. That was going to wake everybody up. So they had to put something in the tap water that shuts down the pineal gland, that closes you off from your cosmic connection. And yeah, I mean, I've been that person since I woke up as a teenager. I'm like, it's in the tap water, man. Like you gotta wake up. You gotta figure out what you're consuming: media, food, and water, and your relationships. And if you go around yelling that, they're going to lock you up. They're going to call you crazy. Even the anthropologists who went and studied the shamans immediately labeled them as schizophrenic. And maybe that's your Munchausen syndrome. You know, you're schizophrenic. We got to drug you. Oh, well, they got their own drugs. They've already figured out the jungle. They don't need our Western pharma. But since it's empowering, they had to stop that. And now where's everyone who wakes up, where they're going? They're all going down to Peru, right? Because that's where you're going to have that experience. And yet we still have the trouble. So it seems that there's more people awake today than there ever has been before. And it seems like the top's trying to crush it down. I wonder when we're going to get to that critical mass, or maybe we are. I'm not sure what's missing here to really push this thing to topple over the house of cards, because it really seems like there's a lot of the cards at the bottom been yanked. So what's really holding up the house of cards at this point? Obviously, our fears, old programs, ego, and having to live in a society that requires money just to get by. But I really want to, I mean, this is part of it. Yeah, I really want to topple the house of cards, but then there's a fear, you know, they're going to come arrest you. I went down to the Freedom Convoy actually on a hit of acid, and I was like, oh wow, this is really the love movement. Everyone's like, you're crazy, you're going to get hurt. I dropped my cell phone twice, and immediately someone handed it back to me. Like immediately. I'm like, hey, this is a relatively safe place. This is probably safer than the streets when they are in their regular form. I saw so many things at the Freedom Convoy. University Avenue was completely empty. So they're saying how disruptive the Freedom Convoy is. But in the hospital district, it was dead quiet, quieter than it's ever been, but quieter than during normal times. Apparently in Ottawa, crime was down 90% during the trucker occupation, right? Like if all the realities, you look at all the realities, you're like, oh my God, this was so much better. And then, oh, well, then they came into a love movement with police, and that's what they did in the 60s. They came in and started beating hippies with batons. And so that's always been the response when we try to wake up entirely. They come in with violence and crack down on it. So history seems to repeat itself, but yeah, I guess my question would be, how are we going to topple this house of cards?
I think we need our foundation strong. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If the foundation, if the cards had already crumbled and we weren't connected, we're all in our individual boxes of the lives that we lead, and the cards fall on top of us. And then we're left underneath of these cards with everyone else who has had the cards fall on top of them. We don't have relationships with, because we haven't been building community, except for if we have. And if we have, we're ahead of time. And if we haven't, it's time. It's time to build communities of common unity, coming together and saying, okay, I don't agree with you, but I'm not saying I don't agree with what's been said today. But if you don't agree with what's been said today, that's okay too. Comment, leave a comment in the comments below when you watch this replay and say what you believe, without that being personalized as an attack on any one of us being crazy or being off our rocker for the perspectives that we've shared, because we all have crazy ideas. But it's like that, I forget who is originally sourced to have said it, but it's like, here's to the crazy ones. It's like, generally speaking, the crazy ones are the ones that are crazy enough to believe that we might actually be able to do it.
Innovative.
Yeah, absolutely. And teenagers, like the rebel inside of us, teenagers are built to push the bounds. My friend Dwigu, who came on the last podcast that Katya and I did, it's just like, I spent some time with her last week, and she was saying, like, the terrible twos are when the kids are pushing against their boundaries and they're trying to see what are the limits of the love? Where are the limits on the love? When do I become unlovable because I push too far? And then that's how we auto-domesticate ourselves, according to Don Miguel Ruiz's auto-domestication process of learning what we think others might think if we do a certain thing or don't do a certain thing. And then we modify and auto-domesticate ourselves just like we would train a pet. Cue, response, reward, routine. It's a simple process. And the last 2 years of this PSYOP have absolutely been training a certain cue, response, reward, routine mechanism that is not in our best interest, that is not designed to bring people together like this, that is designed to have an online persona so that if we are bad in our real lives, this gets taken away and then nobody knows what we're doing in our real life. Maz, I see you there. Oh, Bella, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that we already, it's funny that, because you mentioned discussion, and discussion is always the way forward, that here in Canada, the seat of our government is at a place called Parliament. In French, le parle, that's not good French, but parler, the French word for speaking. Parliament means the place of speaking, the place to discuss. And yet nobody went out, nobody invited the leadership of the freedom move of the truckers into the place of speaking to talk. They say, oh, we'll go run for office and then you'll be invited into our private group to have a discussion. But that's their filtration process so that nobody gets in there with any radical views or ideas or even discussion. As disgusted as the Conservatives were by the Emergencies Act, they didn't stop it until after it was used to push the people out, because they were also for pushing them out by force. So yeah, our Canadian institutions, our place of speaking, our Parliament, is no longer the place of discussion for the people. It's just those people. It's not us people. And that's, I think, maybe at least in Canada, but it's probably the same in all the countries. I think the base layer of the issue.
It's theater, and
Theater.
there are political whips that whip any politicians, which is a status, into line, because the man or woman wearing the suit or status of politician is ultimately playing that role of theater in order for them to be able to provide for their family. And we've been put into our own little boxes so that we only focus on what I got to do in my box, and then I can leave my box in order to go back to the box that I live in with the ones that I love, that also, you know, it's this box cultures, which is the cult you are, that keep us safely separate from ourselves and one another. All right, Maz, your turn.
No, I was going to jump in when you said who is the crazy guy, and you didn't allow me to jump in because then you start saying good things. So I had to keep my mouth shut because I thought I am the craziest guy on the block. So when you say no, being crazy is good, then I had to keep quiet.
Yeah, right?
Sure. No, I really don't know what to say, but the point, what I will raise here is because during this conversation, I haven't heard anything about trust. I'm not talking about corporation trust amongst the people, trust in yourself, and knowing exactly who you are. And you don't even need to know who you are. You have to be who you are. Then things start changing. Because if you know, or if you are who you are, I don't know how else to say it, in your language, which is limiting language, okay? The language is always the limiting part of everything we do, is when you know who you are, and you don't bend to desire of others, as long as it's not benefiting you and the society. So I always consider myself as a non-compliant. If you tell me do's and don'ts, I automatically start resisting. You have to convince me that I have to do it, and it's good for me and everyone else. Then I'll do it. So, as I said, I did not hear anything about the word trust in this conversation, which I truly believe is the most important thing for us to have. Trust in ourselves, trust in our brothers, sisters, or whatever you want to put it. And the other one that I will raise here is when you talk about education. Education is again limiting. Knowledge is a tool that frees us. When you have knowledge and experience, you're free. You know it. But when you educate you become educated, you have to fit into that box in order to be graduated. You have to fulfill and satisfy the teacher. Who is that teacher? The society, the politician, and so on. So I thought to raise those points. I don't want to take away from the conversation, but my personal thing is really believing and trusting who you are, and do everything not because we have to, not because of convenience or relationship. From what my experience in life mostly depends on we love each other, we get involved in each other, we create a joint venture because of the convenience. As a matter of fact, not too long ago, I was in a discussion with the group, and somehow the conversation came to being involved with the husband and wife or partners. And I said, well, I have been married for over 50 years. They said, oh my gosh, how did you do it? I said, it's very simple. We meant with what we said. When you say, I love you, are you really completing the sentence, or you are missing the last part, that I love you as long as you do what I want you to do? So if you have that, whatever we say is not complete, then we have problems. And the society is based on that. The whole problem in our society, we point finger always at others. This is what they are doing to us. What do you mean? Don't you ever consider the role you played in this game? What are we doing to change it? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, while you were speaking, Carolyn Mace's work came to mind, and I often reference her work around woundology, which is how we have become a culture of people who connect through our wounds. And so it's like I tell you my story and the drama and the trauma that I've just been through, and then you try to one up me by saying, oh, you think that's bad? Listen to my story. And then it's like you connect through your wounds and the emotional scar tissue. So I was just thinking of that when you were saying about the need to trust ourselves, because if we're in that victim place of needing to connect through our problems, we are not willing to actually surrender the problems if that's our means of currency. It's like our friend Heather was here before as well, and we had lunch. And while she was here, she got a phone call from a friend, because I don't know which school it was, but there was a gunman. A kid came with a gun to the school. And so she had called while that was going on. And so Heather had answered the phone, but it's very befitting given what we're doing here. And the fact that that situation, that soul would come into the energy of this on right beforehand, because we are all interconnected in this way. And Maz, when you say about how if you don't know what you stand for, you'll fall for anything, paraphrased, using someone else's quote that I don't remember who it came from, but the point anyway is that Carolyn Mace also has work around the 4 survival archetypes, which does very much tie into all of the mind control programming and propaganda, because ultimately we have a victim, saboteur, prostitute, and child within that is either in the scared side or the sacred side. And when we understand that piece of things, then we can understand that it is the prostitute within us that knows our price. Like, we'll sell out if these boxes are checked, right? But the prostitute is also the archetype, which is a familiar pattern that gets filled in with energy, that knows what we won't sell ourselves out for because we've been in an abusive relationship, or because we've been in a situation where we had to sacrifice a part of us in order to go along with something we didn't fully believe, but we thought we needed to. The sacred prostitute is the part of us that says, shame on you if you fool me once, shame on me if you fool me twice. Not doing it again. I'll stand regardless of the price.
No, let me say, let me borrow your prostitute part of it. In my view, we are all prostitutes. The only difference is the price.
Mhm.
So don't be a cheap one. It's simple.
Don't be what?
You cheap one.
Don't be a cheap one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Overcharge so no one wants you. So,
But this is the crazy thing. People are selling out for fiat currency that's not backed by anything other than the trust that we give it.
and I want to also raise when you were talking about problems, as far as I'm concerned, every problem is an opportunity. We are missing that part because if there was no problem, we didn't have to do anything. What would we do? If you were fed, you didn't have to cook, you didn't have to heat a house, you didn't have to do any of those things. What would you do? We need to deal with the, for example, climate in this part of the world. So you need to have a nice roof over your head. You have to warm it up, all that. So we have to work with. So when we turn those problems into opportunity, then becomes amazingly beautiful.
Yes. Which is hopefully what today has been for each of you who came today, and for everyone who watches the replay and gives it a like and leaves a comment to let us know what you want to go into in a deeper way next time, because I do believe that these need to continue to happen so that we can connect in common unity and share our perspectives again. And so alternative perspectives are welcome without judgment. And so unless there's anyone with a final word that you'd like to put into the space, Katya, I feel like throwing it over to you to round it out.
Hi. I guess just to recap, the more that we get in tune with who we are, and I call it self-knowledge, this self-knowledge discovery and inquiry, which answers the question, who am I? How do I operate? And what is my life for? I think those are the three key questions that we can kind of walk away with. And in answering those authentically, we are less inclined to be manipulated, controlled, because we're in charge. It's about our sovereignty, our integrity, our responsibility. And so that's kind of like how I would leave it for today.
I love it. Thank you, thank you, thank you for showing up. I'm going to shut the replay off, or the recording off, and simply sign off for everyone who didn't make it in the room. And we may have some conscious conversation or jump off, but however it goes, you got to know by being in the room. So thank you. Peace out.
Thank you
Peace.
for organizing all this.
All the best.